Chapter 4 The Deadly Caissons. In March 1870, the first caisson was ready to be launched into the East River like a boat. The caisson was like a building, without a floor. It was 168 feet long and 102 feet wide, as big as 2 basketball courts. The roof of the caisson was 5 feet thick at first. After it was launched, more wood was added to the roof to make it even thicker. When it was finished, the roof was 15 feet thick. The whole thing weighed 6 million pounds. It had been built by a shipbuilder because, in some ways, a caisson was a lot like an upside-down ship. It had to be waterproof like a ship, and it had to float like a ship, at least at first. It had to be sturdy enough to hold the weight of a huge stone bridge tower, but it also had to have a room inside so men could work underwater. Once the caisson was floating on the river, it would be moved into place. Washington Roebling would say exactly where the caisson should go. Then, huge pieces of stone would be piled up on top of it to make it heavy. Pretty soon, it would sink to the bottom of the river. The room inside the caisson would fill up with water at first, since there was no floor in the caisson. The river bottom was the floor. But Washington Roebling had a plan. He had big machines that would force air, called compressed air, into the space. The air would push all the water out. Then men could climb down into the room from above and be able to breathe inside. How compressed air moves water. Try it. Here's a trick you can do to show how compressed air moved water out of a caisson. Fill a mug with water almost to the top. Set the mug on a kitchen counter. Blow up a balloon, but don't tie a knot in it. Hold the balloon's neck closed with your fingers. Slide the neck into the water and hold it under. Now let the air out and watch what happens. The air pushed some of the water up and out of the mug, didn't it? That's how the compressed air pushed water out of a huge caisson. Of course, it took a lot more than a balloon to force water out of a caisson. It took 6 big machines with huge motors, but with all the air compressors running, all the water in the caisson was emptied out in just a few hours. Once men were inside the caisson, they could dig out the floor of the river. Little by little, as they dug, the caisson would settle into riverbed, lower and lower. Finally, it would reach solid rock, called bedrock. Then the caisson would be filled with concrete. The base for the towers would be solid and safe. The company that built the first caisson thought the whole idea was a little crazy. They weren't even sure it would work, so they insisted on being paid in advance. No one even knew if the first caisson would float after it was launched into the river, but it did. About 3,000 people came to watch. Washington Roebling was there every single day to make sure things went well. But almost from the start, it was a scary, dangerous job. On the first day, a crew of men climbed down into a tube. It was like an elevator shaft that led down into the caisson. In the tube, there was a small space with doors at the top and bottom. It was an airlock. The airlock kept compressed air inside the caisson. Compressed air wasn't like regular air, though. It pressed on people's bodies harder than the air outside. When a dozen men were inside the airlock, they closed the top door tight. Then they opened a little hole from below. It let the compressed air into the airlock chamber. All of a sudden, there was a terrible screeching noise, like a steam whistle. The pressure hurt their ears like the pressure on an airplane can hurt sometimes. only worse. It hurt their heads, too. It felt like they might explode. The men wanted to leave immediately, but they didn't. They were being paid good money, $2 a day. So the men stood it for as long as they could. They went into the caisson and got to work. The air pressure had a strange effect on them, though. For one thing, it changed their voices. Inside the caisson, their voices sounded high-pitched, like girls' voices. They couldn't whistle in the caisson either. It also made them extremely hungry, hungrier than they'd ever been. It was hot down there, too, and very humid. People started sweating right away, even if they weren't doing any work. Newspapers wrote about the workers in the caisson. They said they were either heroes or fools. It seemed so dangerous to go work underneath the water. And what were they doing down there? From the banks of the river, no one could see a thing. Every day, more than 200 men went down into the caissons. Their main job was to dig into the river bottom so the caisson would settle into it. They had to dig out huge boulders and break them into small pieces with sledgehammers. Then the boulders were sent up to the top through tubes. Other things were sent up through tubes too. Since there was no bathroom in the caisson, the men used a wooden box filled halfway with water as a toilet. To empty the toilet, they put a tube in it that ran up through the roof. The air pressure in the tube would suck all the poop up to the surface and spray it into the air. As the men dug out the river, the caisson sank. As the caisson sank, workers above ground added stone blocks to the top of it for the towers. That way, there was always some stone sticking up above the waterline. Little by little, the caisson was sinking and the tower was being built. But most of the tower was still underwater. The work underground was filthy and hard. The men were standing in river muck. They had candles for lights as well as lime lights, a kind of special gaslight used at that time on theater stages, but any kind of flame was dangerous. The compressed air made it more likely that things would explode. It took months to dig out the river floor, and some of the men who worked in the caisson were starting to get sick. No one in America at the time knew the real reason why.